Every guy at the car show with a chrome air cleaner claims he's got a rock crusher under the floorboards. They want the whine, they want the street cred, but here's the mechanical truth Zora Duntov didn't put in the brochures. For 90% of you, the M22 was the worst mistake GM ever made for the street. That legendary 22-degree gear angle, it wasn't a performance upgrade, it was a desperate last-minute band-aid for an aluminum case that couldn't handle big block torque. And while it saved the case from splitting on a drag strip launch, it created a silent killer: heat. On a 30-minute highway cruise, a real M22 is literally cooking its own bearings in a bath of weaponized oil. Today, we're separating the magazine buzzwords from the metallurgy. I'm going to show you why the pros actually hunted for M21s, why the weak Saginaw might actually be tougher than your Muncie, and the real reason your rock crusher is probably a ticking time bomb. The indestructible delusion. Let's kill the first myth right now. The M22 is not stronger than the M20 or M21. They all use the exact same aluminum case, same casting, same 80-pound housing. The only difference is what's spinning inside that case, and that difference is about to become your worst nightmare. The strength everyone obsesses over, it's not in the mass of the metal, it's in the geometry of the gear teeth. And that geometry is a double-edged sword that most people don't understand until they're standing in a puddle of their own transmission fluid. Here's the physics lesson your buddy with the Chevelle never learned. Gear teeth cut at a 45-degree helix angle, like the M20 and M21, create what engineers call axial thrust. That means when the gears mesh under load, they're trying to shove themselves out the front and back of the case. It's like pushing two opposing screws together. They want to separate along the axis of rotation. The M22's 22-degree angle changes that force vector completely. Instead of shoving the gears forward and backward, it converts that thrust into radial load, pushing the gears straight down into the shafts and bearings. On paper, this sounds genius. You're not trying to blow the case apart anymore, you're just crushing everything straight down into the support structure. But here's what the marketing department forgot to mention. You just turned your transmission into a hydraulic press that never stops squeezing. The M22's secret killer: thermal runaway. The rock crusher whine everyone loves? That's not the sound of strength, that's the sound of friction cooking your transmission from the inside out. When you cut a gear at 22 degrees, you're creating a tooth profile that's almost straight, and straight-cut gears have a brutal problem. The contact patch between teeth is tiny. You're concentrating all the torque from your 454 into a contact area the size of a pencil eraser. That creates pressure readings that would make a metallurgist weep. The M21 with its 45-degree helical cut? Those gears slide into mesh. It's a smooth, rolling contact with a larger surface area distributing the load. The M22 doesn't slide, it collides. Every single gear mesh is a controlled impact, and impacts generate heat. Now here's where the engineering really falls apart. That 80-pound aluminum case that both transmissions share, it's designed to dissipate heat from helical gears running at normal street temperatures, but the M22 is generating localized hotspots on the gear teeth that the case was never engineered to handle. You're driving down the highway at 70 miles per hour, third gear, thinking everything is fine because your temp gauge looks good. But inside that aluminum case, the contact patches between your M22 gear teeth are hitting temperatures that start changing the molecular structure of the steel. The gear oil breaks down. The needle bearings on the countershaft start running in what's basically burned varnish instead of lubricant. This is why every real M22 that's seen street miles has blue gear teeth. That's not a racing patina, that's heat discoloration from thermal stress. And those hammered countershaft needle bearings everyone finds during rebuilds? That didn't happen in a quarter-mile pass, that happened during your 30-minute commute, one microscopic impact at a time, cooking an oil that stopped being oil about 15 miles ago. The M22 doesn't fail from overload, it fails from overheating during normal use. It's thermal runaway in slow motion. So if the M22 is grenading itself on the highway, why did the supposedly weaker transmission survive? Because they understood something GM's racing division forgot. Endurance isn't about peak strength, it's about heat management and case rigidity. The M21 with its 45-degree helical gears was actually the better transmission for street use. Yeah, it creates more axial thrust. Yeah, the case has to work harder to keep everything aligned, but those helical gears run cool. The larger contact patch spreads the load. The sliding mesh creates a hydrodynamic film of oil that actually works as designed. You could run an M21 behind a 450 horsepower small block all day, and as long as you weren't shock loading it with drag launches, it would outlast the car. The iron versus aluminum reality. But here's the part that's going to blow your mind. The Saginaw. Yeah, the cheap cast iron gearbox everyone threw in the dumpster. The comment sections are full of guys swearing their Saginaw took a beating that killed their Muncie. They're not lying. Here's the engineering reason why. It comes down to Young's modulus, stiffness. The Muncie is aluminum. Aluminum is light, about 80 pounds wet, but aluminum has a low modulus of elasticity. When you hit a Muncie with 450 foot-pounds of torque, the case doesn't just hold the gears, it stretches, it twists. Imagine the case is a balloon being squeezed. When the case flexes, the distance between the main shaft and the countershaft actually increases. When those shafts spread apart, the gears aren't meshing deep in the root anymore. They're touching at the tips. And what happens when you put all that big block torque on the very tip of a gear tooth? Snap. Now look at the Saginaw or the Ford top loader. Cast iron, heavy, ugly, but iron is rigid. It doesn't flex. Even if the Saginaw gears are technically weaker metal, the case keeps them perfectly aligned. The contact patch stays true. The gear mesh stays deep in the root where it's supposed to be. The M22 Rock Crusher was GM's attempt to fix this without using heavy iron. They changed the gear angle to stop the case from exploding, but they never fixed the root problem. The case is a noodle. You can't put racing gears in a flexing case and expect it to work on the street. That's not engineering, that's wishful thinking. The cast iron Saginaw that everyone calls a truck transmission, that thing stays rigid. It weighs more, it's slower to shift, but it doesn't flex. And in transmission longevity, rigidity beats lightweight every single time. And by 1974, even the professional racers figured this out. They ditched the Rock Crusher and started running Borg-Warner's Super T10s. Better alloys, better bearing support, better case design. The Muncie became a footnote, and the M22 became a marketing myth that won't die. Forensic identification, beyond the whine. So how do you know if you actually have an M22? Because I guarantee half of you hearing that Rock Crusher whine under your car are actually listening to something completely different. A worn-out M20 with bad bearings sounds exactly like an M22 to someone who's never heard both side by side. That metallic gear noise everyone associates with the Rock Crusher, that's just straight cut or heavily worn gear mesh. You can create that sound with any Muncie if you run it long enough without proper maintenance. The drain plug myth needs to die too. People see a side-mounted drain plug and immediately claim M22. Wrong. GM added drain plugs to all Muncies in late 1960 and early 1970. It's a year identifier, not a model identifier. There's only one way to properly identify an M22, and it requires pulling the side cover. You need to count the teeth on the input shaft and cluster gear, and you need to see the actual angle of the gear cut. The M20 uses a 26-tooth input gear. The M21 uses a 27-tooth input gear. The M22 uses a 26-tooth input gear with the shallow 22-degree angle. If you're not looking at the actual gears, you're guessing, and most of you are guessing wrong. The verdict: what should you build? If you're building a street car, do not use an M22. I don't care how good it sounds. I don't care what your uncle told you about his Yenko Camaro. You are installing a transmission that's engineering incompatible with street use. Buy an M21. Buy a modern Tremec TKX. Hell, buy a Super T10 and join the adults who figured this out in 1974. If you want the whine, buy a blower. If you want a transmission that survives the decade, stop chasing the Rock Crusher myth. The M22 was purpose-built for one thing: surviving shock loads on a drag strip for a quarter mile at a time, with teardowns between rounds. It was never designed for sustained operation. It was never designed for highway cruising. It was an emergency fix for a case design problem that GM solved by sacrificing thermal stability. You know what's stronger than an M22? A transmission that's still in one piece after 50,000 miles. Now that you know the M22 is a heat-generating nightmare, how do you actually get a Muncie to survive 500 horsepower? The answer isn't a casting number, it's a specific modification to the cluster pin that changes everything. Hit subscribe, because next week I'm showing you exactly how to build the transmission GM should have made.